We put him on this program, and in a little over 6 months' time, he came back in 6'4", and I had to look up to him. I'll tell you. 6'4", and his spine was as straight as an arrow's. And he could wiggle it. He was back in yoga. He was back in athletics again. One happy individual. And this was done, and why? Because in the formula, the bone, flesh, and cartilage, it has in it the herbs that will leach out the dead inorganic minerals that are locking it in place and put back in live organic minerals that's needed to make it whole.
Why wouldn't we want to use this on varicose veins? Is it not astringent enough?
We've used it on a few varicosities and with success. But we have had a really greater success with oak bark. Yes.
Last August, when you were up in San Francisco at the National Health Convention, I asked you what to do. I was going to Sweden to visit my mother, who had just broken her arm on a trip. And I took the bone, flesh, and cartilage over there, and I says, "Mother, you will." And she did. And when she did come back to the States, the doctors were amazed how fast a 67-year-old woman would heal. And she's still taking BFC.
Well, you know, as far as age is concerned, we have osteomyelitis, the bones breaking so easy in the human body. We had a lady in her 80s that had broken her hip and leg so badly that they said because of her age they didn't think it would ever heal, but they put her into a cast for 3 months. And when she came out, it might as well have been broomsticks because they did not knit. We used the formula. The next time around, the next time it was taken off, she had a perfect leg. And where the bones had shattered, where they had gone to pieces, they went back like a jigsaw puzzle in the right place, fit back in again. And this woman, in her 80s, the last I heard of her, she was back out doing square dancing. We've heard so many miracles. I just left the city, Sacramento, last week that I was arrested for 11 cases wherein they said it was impossible for any of these 11 cases to have been healed, and it was just wild stories. And I had a fine of $2,500 per case for 11 of them. And every one of them had a doctor's article on it and notarized and signed that it could not be cured. Such as I've been telling you. And falling hair or baldness, such as blindness, and all of these. Well, I was up for that plus, I guess, 50 or 75,000 for attorney's fees. Some kind soul wrote to the Inquirer, crazy as it sounds, and he said, "Have you been healed with herbs? If so, write into the prosecuting attorney in Sacramento." His desk was stacked so high. He contacted our attorney and said, "Would you have him come in and see if we can settle this thing out of court?" Which we did. All right. Why? Because some of the stories I'm telling you are as crazy and far-fetched as anything could be. And I'm not asking you to believe one of them. All I'm asking you is to carry the ball and go out and see that you got your own patients that are getting healed.
Well, I have a friend who has a daughter who was married 6 months, was taking birth control pills, and had a blood clot burst in the back of the neck, and she's a complete paraplegic. They settled $250,000 on her in court, the birth control company did. She can move nothing but her head. her legs and arms can be moved around, but she has no control over them. Do you think that she would have a chance with this?
I can see no reason why it wouldn't work. I can see no reason.
Do you think that, I don't know if I could get her on this diet, but maybe just the bone crushing cartilage fomentation?
Sure, try anything. You know, one step. We have seen some of the most horrible cases that mankind says couldn't be helped in any way, that are healed today.
So she's in Seattle, and there'd be no way I could get to her to keep her on the diet. Maybe I could get her mother to do the fomentation.
Well, Seattle itself, if you get to the right hospital, because as far as blood clots are concerned, I'll have to tell you this one. I was down on the low west coast, and I got a long-distance call from Seattle. And when I got on the phone, they said, "Will you hold the line, please?" Well, this is a doctor who is in surgery, and we've got to pull him out of surgery. So I held the line, and he got someone to take his place, and came to the phone, and he said, "I have a very interesting case, doctor." He said, "I'd like you to help me. I understand you can from what people have told me." A little sarcastic, the way he said it. He said, "I have a lady that's getting up in years. She has a blood clot on her leg. I examined it and decided that I could bypass the blood clot with an operation. But as I examined the leg on down, I found out that she had gangrene in the ankle and the foot. So the hospital committee met with me, and we decided there was only one way to go: amputate. Because there's no need to bypass the clot when you got gangrene down there, and they knew that they couldn't do the whole thing. They would just have to have the leg removed. I was in Seattle a week before last, I guess it was. And a lady came up and told me the story again and brought me up to date on it. Well, this doctor had told me, he said, "The reason I'm calling you is against my own judgment," but he said, "The lady's daughter said, 'You're not cutting my mother's leg off.'" And he said, "Well, as far as I'm concerned and the staff is concerned, that leg comes off." And she said, "She can be cured. The blood clot, the gangrene, I studied under Dr. Christopher in Idaho, and I know it can be done. And my sister will be here in a few hours, and she will verify it." Well, the sister came in, and she says, "I studied under him in Seattle right here." And he told us the same thing. Well, he said, "It sounds awfully far-fetched to me," but he said, "The reason I'm asking you, imploring with you to assist me, the woman that came to me and said her mother's leg couldn't be cut off happens to be my wife." Well, that's getting pretty close to home. And he said, "I'm in trouble unless I do something." Well, I told him over the phone what to do to get the oak bark and make the fomentation, hot and cold, and changing it and putting it over the blood clot area, at least 5 or 6 inches around it. And I said the blood clot will be gone in 24 to 48 hours. "Yeah, but now what about the gangrene?" So I told him to take the marshmallow, make it into a tea, and soak her leg in the marshmallow. And I said, within a couple or 3 days, the gangrene will be gone. He said, "That's hard to take." Well, I said, "That's up to you." Well, he says, "I've got to take it. It's my wife and her mother." Well, he called me back in 3 days courtesy to trace me down. I was on the road, traveling, lecture to lecture. He said, "Doctor," he said, "I had to just call you and tell you I am so grateful, and my wife is so grateful, because it didn't take 48 hours, it only took 24 hours for that blood clot to clear up." But he said, the gangrene, he said, in 3 days, it's completely out of the ankle, out of the foot, and only a little left in the toes. We're really thrilled. Well, I didn't know what had happened to the case until week before last. This lady came and told me, she said, "We were all so happy. And so we were ready to take her home." And there in the hospital, she came down with pneumonia. And the pneumonia got ahead of them. And so they ignored the gangrene and worked on the pneumonia. And when they remembered the gangrene, it was almost up to her knee. And they had to remove her leg. It got ahead of them. But we want you to know that we saw the healing. And that made me feel pretty good, you know. They had seen how close it was to be completely healed, and they had the admittance from the hospital itself that it was because the lady had gone back in for the pneumonia that let it go wild. Well, I'm just telling you these things to show you it can be done.
I have a question on the whole Incurables program. Because you're working with the liver first, you don't worry about dumping these toxins too quickly into their system?
One thing about the dumping of the toxic poisons into the body by cleaning up the liver is that if a person is strong enough and brave enough, they can take it. But when those toxic poisons start coming out, sometimes you have to taper. You've got to be a little careful in some cases. There are no two people alike. There are no two alike. And you can't run them down the assembly line. They've got to be done individually.
Dr. Christopher, I have an uncle that's had several strokes in a row. They don't even know where the clots are. What would you recommend for that?
We've worked with a number of stroke cases. I remember one man who had had a stroke and was in the wheelchair for over 6 years. He'd been a very active automobile salesman. It's about broke his heart to be in the wheelchair. We did the bone, flesh, and cartilage over the head and down the spine. He followed on through, and he was back out selling cars again, no wheelchair. Now, the program's got to be gone through step by step. Look, as far as the Incurables program is concerned, if you'll do it step by step, you're going to get results. There are only the 3 that can't be handled. There's one thing that we do ask you to add, and that is the zonal therapy on the feet, or if the feet are in bad condition, the hands. But this is also a must. Now, if the liver is in a very severe condition, in a bad way, use the castor oil fomentation. It's explained in the little booklet, 3-Day Cleanse and Mucusless Diet. We have seen many, many cases of stroke and polio, multiple sclerosis and muscular dystrophy cleared. But here is the program. Number 1, we start at the motor nerve.
By motor nerve, do you mean the pyramidal tract?
That's right. The medulla oblongata, clean it up, and then down that spine, out to the rest of the nerves. Now, feed calcium, feed the body, clean the bowel, and use the red clover combination tea. That'll be a cup 3 times a day. And we're on the road, step by step.
Dr. Christopher, if you soak the BF&C herbs in olive oil to make like a liniment, I guess, to massage on the scalp, will one be more potent than the other if it's a fomentation or if it's the oil?
She asks, how about putting olive oil instead of water into the fomentation? We do have the BF&C in paste form, in ointment form. it will never work as fast as the water will itself. Making it into a fomentation, it goes directly into the bloodstream. Any other questions?
Yeah, are there special things you would do for like MS or Parkinson's other than what?
This is it, because we work on the nerve, we work on the calcium renewing, we work on getting that spine in proper condition, and step by step. Because we've had these cases. We have had cases where they have lain there in bed, unable to raise an arm or a leg, and when they're that far along, they're in pretty serious condition. And we have seen them healed. These cases, honest to goodness, you'll never be so happy as when you have them yourself. And you can say, I've seen this. And it'll come to every one of you if you'll work at it.
What about a fracture of the metatarsal with a crushing fracture? A crushing fracture.
Let me tell you about the crushing fractures. I'll tell you about a young man in Mesa, Arizona, who had his foot crushed. And the bones were so badly broken up that they wanted to amputate. His father happens to be a nature doctor, and he used the bone, flesh, and cartilage. The beautiful part about it is, though that was all crushed and all the bones all mixed up in there, they all came back to the place where they belonged, like a jigsaw puzzle, and fit in, piece by piece. And he is out riding motorcycles, got a half-wit. You know, seems like you'd have brains enough to learn once. But he's back at it. But he was quite thrilled. We had a person who had lost the joint and the ball and joint for the hip.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and it was completely worn out. It's brand new today from bone, flesh, and cartilage, and nothing else added. I'll tell you, don't sell herbs short.
Didn't he put a cast on that foot?
Oh, yes.
So it wasn't just the fomentation, it was
Yes.
internally used.
Yes, it was healed from there. But he also drank plenty of comfrey. You see, your bone, flesh, and cartilage formula is made your comfrey. But it went on from there.
For scoliosis, did you just put it in the spine, the same thing?
Same thing. Right down the spine.
Do you follow the curvature?
Yes. Follow it, and it'll come back. We have a case of a humpback, 45 years. The lady was dropped when she was 6 months old, and she had a humpback. And that woman has a back that's just as straight as anybody's back in this room. And it was done after 45 years of being locked there. These things, folks, have been lying hidden all these years. And people have ridiculed them. How often in these 40 years have I been called a witch doctor and a half-wit? How many times? It's innumerable. It was to a point where I'd call a sweet wife and tell her which hotel or which jail I was in. And it's been that way for 40 years, pretty near. But today, the pendulum is swinging our way. We have twice a month anywhere from 35 to 80 doctors. 10% of those doctors, average medical doctors, that are here to find out what to do on the holistic routine. Sincere people who want to know how to help their fellow men. And this program is growing faster than I ever dreamed it would grow. And why? Because we've got people who believe and people who come out and want to follow the program.
I was wondering about a traumatic triplegic, an accident from a motorcycle, also has sphincter incontinence. with it and has a suprapubic catheter. What can be done for that in addition?
Well, with the condition here, the incontinence, of course, would be possibly damaged there in the kidney bladder area. I don't know. I don't know. But the same program would be used as with any other incurables, because wherever the damage is, we had a case up on 13th East in Salt Lake where a motorcycle accident, and the leg had been practically torn to shreds, and used the same formula and brought it back with no scars. That's the beautiful part about this. Now, after it's been done for a period of time, well, I don't know.
Christopher, you must have had many people on your incurables program who believe in it, and others who are on it simply because their family is forcing them to do it. Do you ever find there's a difference in the length of time of healing in those who really have faith?
Well, the person who has health and faith, who have faith, will of course heal faster. But we have seen cases where they didn't even know that we were doing anything for them because they were in a coma. And we have seen healings in a coma. We have seen them, you name it. We've had some real experiences, and I love it. Because when you can say, they put that stuff on them and they just believed it would heal them. Faith will do anything. If you got enough faith, you can move mountains with it. All right. But when a person doesn't even know that they're being helped and herbs are being used, this sweet little baby that's now crawling around, they didn't know that the eye formula was going to bring back or put in optic nerves that were never there. It didn't know that. Didn't even know what the score was, but it can see. This is the interesting part.
Speaking of babies, I just heard of a 7-month-old boy who apparently has von Recklinghausen's disease, neurofibromatoma. Well, there's a nerve tumor in the fibrous tissue of the nerve.
Oh, mm-hmm.
And this one, there's apparently a bad one right behind one of the eyes, pushing the eye out.
Is it glaucomic too?
Well, I don't know.
Oh.
And the surgeons want to operate, and they called me and asked me did I know of anything, but I've never seen such a case.
You know, before operation, there's one thing about herbs. Number one, a true herbalist will never give you a toxic herb. Number two, a true herbalist will never give you a poisonous herb because we do not fight poisons with poisons. We go to the cause. And number three, they'll never give you a habit-forming herb. And so, any of the herbs that we would recommend would do either good or no harm. And like the little child that we spoke of, we used the bone, flesh, and cartilage. No, pardon me, we used the B&B, and we used the eye formula and got results. Now, this may be a more severe case. I don't know. It may need BF&C fomentation over the head.
Well, have you seen fibrous tumors dissolve?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I cite one that's...
I mean, the nerve sheath has a fibrous
Yes.
sheath, and it's the tumor forms for some strange reason in that sheath.
Within the sheath.
Yes, and bulges out, and they get all sorts of... I've never seen a case of it, I've just seen it in books.
This is a potassium deficiency. All right. With the program and the way we give it, we have seen these. And where they have used the bone, flesh, and cartilage over the head and over various parts of the body, we have seen tumors dissolved. We have a boy in the Orem area that had a very severe condition with his head and in the brain area, and it was completely cleared. Now this other one I cite where it had either pituitary or pineal, I don't remember, tumor or cyst, but 65%, medical science said, had been dissolved in 6 weeks' time. And in a few more months, it was completely dissolved. Why? Because the formulas that we have are high potassium.
Oh,
They have in them,
BF and C.
yes, extremely high potassium. Also, they have cell proliferants in them.
Got that on
All right, and all of these,
there. So I
Okay.
should look in that direction.
absolutely, absolutely.
Another thing that really helped me when I had my treatment was I was on elderberry tincture.
Elderberry tincture is up with black walnut in potassium. It was powerful. Good. You had a question here.
Yes, in making up the bone, flesh, and cartilage concentrated tea, is it okay to refrigerate it instead of using the vegetable glycerin?
We
And if so, for how long?
Well, the vegetable glycerin, in the first place, is nutritional and healing in itself. We do not like the bone, flesh, and cartilage to be in fermentation long enough to get soured. So a lot depends on weather. I would prefer making it up fresh as you use it. And the family decided, well, let's try the bone, flesh, and cartilage. Well, here we have a case of putting it, fermentation over here, of course, wide over, so that it covers a good area. And that's done every night, all night long, 6 nights a week. A fresh batch each time. Now that was a little rough. We've had some cases that have taken the kettle full and set in the refrigerator and then brought it up to room temperature. All right, now that's all right. But we have seen a rupture come back together again just like this and seal, and tougher than the one on the other side. We have seen an umbilical hernia, big as a golf ball. Every time the person would cough, it would pop out. And we have seen that in 6 weeks. Go down and you couldn't even see scars in 6 weeks. This was a healthy young child with just this one condition here. All right, we saw that go in and completely healed and no reoccurrence. Folks, you're dealing now with one of the powerhouses. This is absolutely one of the most amazing programs. When you get into it, it's one of the most satisfying programs a person can ever ask for.
Using the eye wash, would it be as effective as an eye drop rather than just use it as a wash?
No, it won't, and I'll tell you why. You use a dropper and drop a few drops in, isn't as potent as to take an eye cup and put it over the eye and go back and blink and exercise that eye with a full cup full. Another cup full for this one, and then take the rest of the teacup and drink it down. And do that 3 or more times a day. And by the way, in July, I guess these folks that are running these cameras are having it here for us, the Healthview newsletter group, will have their book out. It'll be a 150-page book on the eyes with our eye formulas.
We have one person that helped and someone else that's doing it that way because they don't have time, they say, and is not doing a thing for them. But the other person seemed to help.
It depends on how they use it. You know, a person that has it sitting up on this shelf isn't going to do them much good. It's just a little on the ridiculous side. Let's face it.
With the hernia, would you put the fermentation around the head and down the spine and on the hernia also?
It would make it that much faster if it were done over the whole thing and the hernia. But in this particular case, I've got to tell you about this lady's husband had a hernia. And so this was early when we first started with the bone, flesh, and cartilage to do the healings with. Well, she and her husband had traveled for 3 days, it was years ago, to get all the herbs to make up the bone, flesh, and cartilage. They finally acquired all this, and they got the cotton, and they got the gauze, and they got the bandages. They got everything. And she had him stretch out, and she was going to put the first application on a great big pot full. All of a sudden he said, nuts, I'm going to get it sewed up. And she said, after we get all this stuff, you're going to get him to sew it up instead of us fixing it this way? Yeah. She said, I would like to take that great big pot of B, F, and C and put right over his head. She said, I was so mad I could have killed him. And he was bullheaded, and so he laid there. And so she had all of this gauze and everything laying around there ready. And she said she had a thumb that for years had twitched, and she couldn't control it. And she was told by the doctors that she would have to have it cut, and they could bring it down, but they couldn't do anything more with it, or bring it up. Well, the naturopathic physician there in Tucson said the same thing. He says, there's nothing we can do about it. But she said, my husband went to bed, going to be operated on the next morning. Sewed up. And I laid there fuming and stewing and mad. And I got up and I looked at that pot of bone, flesh, and cartilage. I thought, gee, I hate to just dump it down the drain. And she looked at that thumb sticking up there. She couldn't get down and been up there for years. And so she said, I took some of the gauze and dipped it down in the bone, flesh, and cartilage and wrapped around it and pulled a rubber glove over it and went to bed and stewed. Well, I went to sleep. The next morning, she said, I jumped out of bed, and she said, that glove slipped off, and I took the bandage with it. And she said,